Some men you just can't reach, the warden said to you as he informed you that you're not only going to spend some time in the prison's notorious hole, but you'll be staying in the feared cell nicknamed the Oriental. You're stripped naked and pushed into this inhumane dungeon, and there you will stay, shivering day and night, sitting in the dark, having to breathe in an unearthly stench. The guards occasionally give you some bread and water, and when that wants to come out of you, all you have is a hole in the floor in which to defecate and urinate in. You can't even flush it away, the guards control that mechanism. So, to torture you even more, they don't flush often. After a few days, you stop screaming and just sit on the concrete floor, rocking back and forth, on the verge of literally losing your mind. What we just described to you was perhaps the worst aspect of Alcatraz, and you have to bear in mind that prisoners sent there were usually deemed unmanageable. One of the reasons people got this way, of course, was because the conditions inside other parts of the prison. Alcatraz was no walk in the park, that's for sure, and today you'll see why. But first, let's give you a little bit of history, because we're all sure our dear viewers are not all experts on America's most notorious prison. Okay, so the nickname of the place was The Rock. And that's because the prison stands on an island about 1¼ miles off the coast of San Francisco. Before it became a regular prison, it was a military prison, and it wasn't until 1934 that civilian convicts started arriving there. It was said to be inescapable, but as you'll later find out, that's still a matter being disputed today. The idea was to send men who had escaped from other prisons to this fortress on a rock, and that would ensure that they would never escape again. Some of the new arrivals in 1934 were called by the authorities the incorrigibles, meaning they just kept getting in trouble, or kept escaping or trying to escape. That line we used at the start, "some men just can't reach," is actually from a classic prison movie called Cool Hand Luke, and the warden in that film believed that Luke was incorrigible. The warden tries to break him by putting him in isolation and fitting him with leg irons. We mentioned the movie because Alcatraz was the kind of place where a man was supposed to be broken. Don't get us wrong, the wardens at the prison weren't all about making men lose their minds, but they wanted to break their will, to kind of exorcise the criminal out of them. All the first guys that arrived in '34, shackled together and watched over by countless agents and U.S. Marshals, were said to be dangerous and unpredictable. These guys were what you might call hardened criminals, and Alcatraz was a kind of experiment to cure them, or at least ensure they couldn't escape or cause any more harm. The dungeon we described at the start was real enough, but generally most people stayed in cells that were on the B block and A block, and those cells usually measured 9 feet by 5 feet and 7 feet high. You didn't get much in the cell. Besides a basin to wash in, a bed to lie on, and a toilet to pee in, you also got a desk. The thing with Alcatraz though, and why it was so notorious, was this thing about breaking the wills or crushing the souls of the men. As one writer put it, the prison was the greatest garbage can of the San Francisco Bay, into which every federal prison dumped its most rotten apples. The authorities didn't mind mistreating a bunch of rotten apples. Sure, prisoners got a visit, but only once a month, and if they fell ill, there was a prison hospital. They could even get a job, usually a hard job we should say, and they could get books from the library. So how come doing time there was so hard? Well, it was all about the rules, and you could find them in the not-so-glossy brochure called Regulations for Inmates USP Alcatraz. You guys might watch prison shows today, and while there is violence, you see inmates laughing and joking with each other, and you see some of them playing cards, watching TV, or even having a game of basketball. In the beginning, there was nothing like this at Alcatraz. You see, there was what was called a strict code of silence, and it is this that broke a lot of men. The code was relaxed in the later years, but at the start, men just had to keep quiet almost all the time. If they didn't, they would be reprimanded and likely sent to an isolation cell. When they ate, they weren't even allowed to speak. Although one former prisoner once said, although talking at meals is prohibited, the men do manage to speak in a grumbling monotone out of their corners of their mouths. He said when he took his first meal there, he was sat next to none other than Machine Gun Kelly, and we guess they didn't talk much. This former inmate also said that there were no clocks in the prison, so the only way inmates knew what time it was when the whistles blew. This was another thing that made the men feel less human. They were living outside of real time. He said during his last year on the Rock, there were only 314 prisoners, but 14 of them went violently insane. And it's not surprising either. When these guys were in their cells, they had to keep quiet. They weren't even allowed to talk to themselves, and they were continually watched over by the guards. The same went for work, as there was no talking at work. During recreation, they could chat, but the rule was they couldn't stand together in groups. This drove some men insane, as did the hard work, and that's why some guys just said enough is enough and killed themselves. One guy slit his own throat, another climbed up a 75-foot fence and jumped to his death. Another, out of sheer madness, cut off his fingers on one hand with a hatchet. One of the first governors at Alcatraz said he didn't believe in psychological illness, and he said those quivering men were just trying to get out of work. It was cold too, almost all the time. Taking a shower wasn't a pleasant experience at all, especially in the winter, because the water was freezing cold. That was for the first 30 years or so until they added hot water to the prison system. There were bars on the cells, so if a guy wanted to take a dump, he didn't exactly get much privacy. In fact, there wasn't much privacy at all. These men were watched virtually all the time, and it drove them nuts. It was run so strictly that men had to stand, sit, walk in single file, eat, stop eating, and all at the blow of a whistle. Before a man could even take a bite of his own food, he had to sit with his hands by his side, and then when the whistle blew, he could eat. They had 20 minutes to finish the food, and not a second more. After that, they had to place their tray, knife, fork, and spoon in the position that was part of the rules. Then they had to sit quietly with their hands at their sides while the guards checked if any of the utensils were not in the proper position. You have to remember that the so-called Iron Men that ran the prison had a zero tolerance regarding not breaking these very strict rules. Oh, what's that? A spoon pointed slightly to the left when it should be at a 180-degree angle? That could get a man in trouble. Mess up with a fork 2 days later or scratch an itch when your arms are supposed to be at your side and wow, what do we got here? A man we just can't reach. One former guard said they treated the men like animals, counting them all day, not allowing them to speak, forcing them to do hard work, and then marching them around in lines like cattle. He said his job was more like working at a zoo. There were many other rules too, such as no trading, gambling, selling, giving, or loaning. That's the same in prisons today, but come on. Who doesn't have hustles in a modern penitentiary? It's what keeps some men sane in this day and age. But in Alcatraz back in the early days, the prisoners really had nothing to do but follow the rules, work, sleep, and do the same again every day. It was hard to sleep at times too, because at nights, the guards liked to do some target practice on dummies outside the cell gates. This wasn't just so they could achieve a better aim, but it was to mentally torment the men who heard the shots. Sometimes the guards would leave the dummies all riddled with bullets for the men to see when they came out of their cells. That was a warning to the inmates, just a reminder of what would happen to them if they tried to escape. This regime literally drove prisoners insane, but the thing was, when a man lost his mind and just cracked, he would likely be sent to isolation. He wouldn't exactly become more mentally balanced there. This was D Block, and it was actually called the Treatment Block. There, the inmates' meals were delivered to their cells and the guys were only allowed out for 2 showers a week. Cells 9 to 14 were known as the Hole, and in there, prisoners were allowed just 1 shower a week and only an hour a week in the exercise yard, provided they were alone. The very worst was the cell we described at the start, which was also called the strip cell. This is how one former prisoner described his experience in the cell. There's no soap, no tobacco, no toothbrush. The smell, well, you can describe it only by the word stink. It's like stepping into a sewer. It is nauseating. You have no shoes, no bed, no mattress, nothing but the 4 damp walls and 2 blankets. He said in 13 days he got 2 proper meals, and the rest of the time the guards gave him a few slices of bread and some water each day. He said he was not allowed to wash and just had to stink in the stink. He knew of one man who'd been in there that got a shower, and that was when the guard threw a bucket of cold water over him. Can you imagine life in the strip in the middle of the winter? Other allegations made by prisoners, but not supported in official documents, is that inmates that went on hunger strikes because of the brutal conditions were force-fed by having a rubber tube put down their throat and having milk and eggs poured into it. Wardens at the prison always denied that prisoners were beaten by guards, although one inmate later wrote, guards would sometimes knock inmates unconscious with lead clubs covered with rubber, weapons called blackjacks. People tried to escape, of course, and in 1938, 3 men tried that after clubbing a guard to death. They were shot and one of them died. Some other inmates later tried to escape and drowned in the bay. The most notorious escape attempt was in 1946. This led to what was called the Battle of Alcatraz. That's because a bunch of men overpowered the guards and managed to get to the weapons room and get themselves some guns. The rest should have been simple, just force the guards to open the doors, and their plan was to do that and then escape by boat. But they couldn't get out of the main door, and instead of just giving up their weapons, they shot some of the guards. The U.S. Marines were called in and killed 3 of the prisoners, while 17 people were injured in total. 2 of the inmates who used the weapons were later sent to the gas chamber. Did anyone escape? Well, you all likely know about the 1962 escape, an elaborate plan that led to 3 men just disappearing. They were never seen again, and if they survived, is still an issue talked about today. Okay, we should tell you that over the years, the conditions in Alcatraz did improve a bit. With the violence and suicides and poor mental health conditions of the prisoners, it seemed that the tactic to keep them quiet and treat them like animals wasn't exactly rehabilitating them. In the later years, the 1950s and until the prison closed in 1963, the silent treatment had all but been abolished and prisoners were allowed things like musical instruments. The gangster Al Capone famously played a banjo in Alcatraz. Prisoners could even listen to the radio and see a movie on the weekends. The place was less Helcatraz in those years, and we should say that the food at Alcatraz was arguably the best food ever served in any US prison. That was one of the problems, actually. The food was expensive, but so were all the guards that had to keep watching over the men 24/7. Not only that, the building was old and it needed constant repairs. Running Alcatraz was 3 times more expensive than running the average prison in the USA. And that was the end of America's most notorious prison. Do you love strange, unexpected stories that defy belief but are completely true? Then you'll love I Am, fascinating tales told from the perspective of those who lived them. Find out what it was like to be a plague doctor during an outbreak of the Black Death, the captain of the Titanic as it sank into the sea, or one of the real Alcatraz escapees. In an all-new episode, jump into the mind of notorious gangster himself, Machine Gun Kelly. It's one you definitely won't want to miss. Go watch right now and don't forget to subscribe and tell us who you want to see brought to life in I Am. Now go watch Prison Escape from Alcatraz, Impossible or Not, and New Secret Letter proves Alcatraz prisoners survived insane prison escape.